Okay, there we go. I am recording. So this is an APA style review session, which is pretty important for English 205, because a lot of basically all of the assignments ask you to write in APA format, and it also ends up being not an insignificant part of your grade. And keeping track of APA can be, a little bit tricky. There are a lot of little rules to follow. So this session is designed to be a review and clear up some confusion on APA style. This presentation was created by Professor Burke. She is the course lead for English 205. It was also developed by Beth Smith, who is the librarian at Hondros. So first of all, why do we even use APA? And there are other different types of citation styles or writing styles as well. Like many people are familiar with MLA, which is run by the Modern Language Association. APA is the American Psychological Association. Harvard has their own citation style. The Associated Press, I believe, has a citation style. So there are a bunch of different styles that you can write in. And the idea behind that is it provides a uniform way, a uniform and consistent way to present information and to cite sources. So I have kind of this quote here at the top of the slide. So it allows readers to focus on ideas being presented rather than formatting, and allows readers to scan works quickly for key points, findings, and sources. So essentially, if everyone at, let's say Hondros is writing in APA style, well, that allows us to locate information faster. It helps us understand, how to locate the sources without getting too bogged down in how the document is laid out or how the sources are being cited. So that's one reason. It also just ensures that everyone is crediting their sources appropriately. In fact, that's maybe the primary reason, is to ensure that we are giving credit to the people whose ideas that we're using. This last bullet point here: in advanced studies and professional practice, APA style ensures that writers report critical details of their research protocol to allow readers to evaluate findings and other researchers to potentially replicate the studies. Tables and figures present data in an engaging, consistent manner. So again, if everyone is kind of using the same style, it just allows for greater ease of access, allows our readers to locate our sources a little bit easier and better understand the information that we're presenting. So in this presentation, we're talking about the two types or two ways that you cite a source, and both are required. They are references, which go at the end of your document, and then in-text citations, which happen within the text itself. On screen here, we have a breakdown of the information provided in a reference. So this is from, this is the very first reading we did in class. We have who, this is the author, so this is written by A. Shaw. In APA format, you don't write out the author's first name or middle name, you just provide their initials. When, this is when the source was published. This is published in 2014. We always put that in parentheses like this. The what, this is kind of the source itself, like the actual article or the actual web page. So why healthcare professionals should write. And then most sources are located within other sources. Like they have a place where you can actually find the source. That's why this is labeled where. So this is the source itself, why healthcare professionals should write. And then we can find that in or from the Center for Health Journalism. So that's within their, within their publication or within their website or on their web page, etc. And then finally, we have a link, which is how to actually access the source. And then same thing here, we have the author, we have last name, comma, first initial, the year of publication. We have the title of the source itself, higher education in the United States, college coursework and American students. This was found on CNN, and here's the link to actually access it. And we have a couple of notes here. So proper nouns, so things like titles or people's names, those should begin with a capital letter. So for instance here, Center for Health Journalism, that is the name of an institution. So we're going to capitalize all the major words in that name, Center Health Journalism. Likewise, people's names are proper nouns as well, so we're going to capitalize those. And then if we jump down here to this other source, yeah, do you have a question?
So it looks like a journal, right? And I was thinking we should like date, like the month and then the day. So I'm the month and then the day comes in. When do you have to cite the of the publication?
So I'm wondering if your question didn't come through super clearly. I'm wondering if maybe you're having Wi-Fi issues or something. But I think I understood I think I understood the gist of your question. Were you asking like when should you put the month that the source was published?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So that is oh, we have someone who wants to enter the room. So putting the month of the source, and I will look this up at the end of the presentation because I want to double check to make sure that I am correct. But providing the month, that tends to be for like websites, I believe. Sources where the information might change, you know, from time to time. So by and large, you're not going to put the month. Like for most of your references, you don't need to include the month. You're just going to include the year that it was published. But occasionally, like some types of sources will ask you to put the month. But again, when I have a moment, like towards the end of this presentation, I will look that up to double check.
Okay, that would be great because I asked because in the references given for week 1 assignment, I saw that they had written the month for SHA. Like they made it like SHA A 2011 December 14th. So I'm kind of confused as to when you have to and when you don't have to. So you can look it up as you said. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I will definitely get back to you on that. So this is our breakdown of a reference here on screen. Now we're going to look at doing in-text citations. So we use in-text citations basically anytime that we use information from a source. It doesn't matter if we're quoting that source or paraphrasing that source or summarizing that source. Anytime you use information from a source, you need to give it credit with an in-text citation. So we have some examples here. Typically, an in-text citation is going to be the author's last name, a comma, and then the year that the source was published. So here we have Jones, comma, 2021. Now, in some instances, like some sources don't have an author or their author isn't listed. In that case, you're typically going to put the title of the source. So for instance, our plagiarism spectrum source did not have an author. So there's no author for us to put here, but to make this source recognizable, to tell our readers, where this information came from, we're going to provide the title and put that in quotation marks.
Okay, I got a question on that. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
So if the publication is from a school, let's say Hondros College has made a publication, are you also going to do it just like this one?
Yes, yeah, you would. So it doesn't matter like who publishes the source, you know, who made it. The rules are going to stay pretty consistent.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. If there isn't a date listed, so some sources will not tell you when it was published, you put ND for no date. So in this example, we have an author, King, but there was no date listed. So we do King, comma, ND. Now, sometimes sources won't tell you when the source was originally published, but they will give you like a copyright date, or they will give you the date that the source was last updated. It is acceptable to use that date. So whatever date is available, if it's the publication date, if it's the copyright date, if it's the date that the source was last updated, you put that year. And then if we are quoting from a source, we need to provide either a page number or a paragraph number. Now, that's not the case if you're paraphrasing, and we'll talk a little bit more about paraphrasing later in this presentation. But if you are directly quoting from a source, you want to provide the page or the paragraph number. Now, you know, some sources, especially online sources like websites, are not going to have page numbers, which is when we put the paragraph number. So you just want to count like, you know, however many paragraphs into the document is the quote that you're using. And you would put this abbreviation, para, P-A-R-A, period, tells us paragraph, and that's from paragraph number 4. Down here, we have an example of a page. So this is from Alan. Alan's the author's name. And actually, I'm just noticing now there should be a parentheses here. I will let Heather and Beth know that there's a typo here. But so Alan is our author. This was published in 2021. And then it was on page 105. We indicate that with a P period. Now, if it's like a range of pages, let's say the quote is on page 105 to 106, you would actually put PP period 105-106. So that's the basic way that you do in-text citations. Now, we're going to get into kind of some different ways that you're going to present that information, because it does kind of depend on like what your sentence says or how you are presenting the info. So this is our Shaw source. And here we have an example of the author's name being used in the sentence. So according to Shaw, and when we mention the author's name, we, in parentheses, put the year of publication. So Shaw, parentheses, 2014, and then we have our quote. And now my understanding is, and this is another thing that I can verify and get back to you all. But let's say you are, you know, you're only using Shaw, like that's your only source, and you're going to mention their name a bunch. So, you know, Shaw says this, Shaw says that. It's my understanding that you don't need to put the year of publication after every single time you mention the person's name. I'm pretty sure it's primarily like the first time, like when you say according to Shaw, like when you mention Shaw for the first time, then you put the year of publication. But again, I will double check that and get back to you all. Now, in my second example here, I didn't mention Shaw's name in the sentence. So programs that prepare healthcare professionals incorporate writing instruction because of its benefits. So Shaw's name is not in this sentence. So that means that I do need to include it in my in-text citation at the end of the sentence. So at the end of my sentence, I have my parentheses, Shaw, comma, 2014, in parentheses, period. I'll also point out here that the period comes after the parenthetical citation, because the citation is technically part of the sentence. So we put our punctuation at the end of the sentence after the citation. And then my third example here is if I were to mention the title of the article in my sentence. So in the article, Why Healthcare Professionals Should Write, Shaw, 2014, pointed out that programs that prepare healthcare professionals, so on and so forth. So here I've included my title, but I didn't need to do that. You'll notice that in my first two examples, I didn't mention the title of the article. A lot of times it's nice to include that info. It helps the reader know where you got your information from, but it's not technically required. So like bare minimum, you just need to include the author's name and the publication date. But in this example, I decided that I wanted to include the title of the article. So I've put that here in my quotation marks, but I've still included the author's name and the publication date. And then this is kind of a side note here. And this is something that makes APA a little bit tricky. Like when I was younger, I used exclusively MLA. And then it was only when I became like older, like I was in grad school, that I started using APA format. And something that I found tricky is that when you use the title of a source in like in an essay, in a paragraph, in a discussion board post, the title needs to go in quotation marks like we see here for Why Healthcare Professionals Should Write. But notice that in my reference, like this would go in my reference list, I have not put the title in quotation marks. I don't know why APA decided to do that. Like if I were designing my own citation style, I don't think I would do it that way. I think they do it because it probably looks a little bit cleaner. Like there's just less going on here, but that can be hard to keep track of. It can be hard to remember. But that is like a rule of APA style, is when you mention article titles in your sentence, those go in quotation marks like we have here, but in our reference, they are not included. And so this slide here breaks down, goes into a little bit more detail about the types of examples that I just showed you. So a parenthetical citation, you just heard me use that terminology. A parenthetical citation just means a citation that is within parentheses. So we have two examples of that here: Jones 2023, Sampson 2023, paragraph 4. So this is an in-text citation because it is within the text of the paper that I'm writing, but it's also in parentheses, so we call that a parenthetical citation. And as I've already stated, that's going to usually include the author's last name and the year of publication. If there isn't an author's name, you put the title of the source. The other type, so I showed you here in the article, Why Healthcare Professionals Should Write. This is considered a narrative citation. And that's when the author's last name is incorporated into the text as a part of the sentence. You don't really need to memorize all these terms like parenthetical citation, narrative citations. Just know that those are the two different ways to do it. So if you mention the author's name in the sentence, you put the year right after their name. So like here, according to research conducted by Sampson 2023. So that's a narrative citation. And then at the end of the sentence, we have our parenthetical citation, which tells us what paragraph that quote was found on. So parenthetical citations often include the author's last name and the publication date. That's when we don't mention the author's name in the sentence. So here I just said today is Monday. I didn't mention Jones here, so I have to put Jones's name in my parenthetical citation. Same thing here. Sampson's name is not mentioned in the sentence, so I had to put Sampson's name in my parenthetical citation. In contrast, here I've used Jones's name and Sampson's name in my sentence, so I didn't need to include that in a parenthetical at the end of the sentence. And then to make things a little bit more complicated, occasionally you will have a source. Like let's say you go on a website and you're reading through that website, and that website is quoting from another website or from like a book or from an article. There's a specific way you're supposed to cite that information. And actually, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit here. So ideally, what you really want to do is actually find where the information came from originally. So let's say I'm on a website and that website is quoting from an article. What I should really do, like what is considered best practice in research, is for me to actually go track down that article and quote from the article itself. But sometimes you can't find the original source, or sometimes the assignment just doesn't really call for that. For instance, if you're writing a discussion board post, at least as your instructor, I'm not going to expect you to go track down like a different article just so you can quote from the original. But this information is included here. So, like when you're writing an essay or you are trying to be published, or you're maybe doing a very professional presentation, ideally you want to actually track down the original source of information. But if you can't do that, you can't locate the original source for whatever reason, what you're going to do is you're going to mention the name of the cited information and then say as cited in. So I'll illustrate this with an example. All nurses need to be ready and able to assess the risks and prevention of suicide. The American Psychiatric Nurses Association, APNA, lists an understanding of the statistics, epidemiology, risk factors, and protective factors related to suicide as an essential nursing competency for suicide risk assessment and prevention, as cited in Smith. So what this here, as cited in Smith, this is the actual source that I read. So I read Smith. Smith got that information from the American Psychiatric Nurses Association. So in this example, Smith is who I read. Smith got their information from this organization. So that's how you would handle that. As cited in, you put here what you actually read, but in your sentence, you would still want to give credit to the original person. So let me create kind of a different example here for you. Let's pretend this quote isn't from the American Psychiatric Nurses Association. Let's say it's from someone with the last name Jones. So I would just say, Jones states that, and I have my quote, and then as cited in Smith, because me, the person who wrote this, I didn't read Jones, I read Smith. So in my parenthetical citation here, I put the thing that I actually read, as cited in Smith. Smith was published in 2017. This quote was on page 20. And here's our reference here. So, again, Smith is the source that I actually read. Smith got their information from the American Psychiatric Nurses Association. That's potentially a little bit confusing. So does anyone have any questions about how to do that or why we do that?
Yeah, so it means that in the actual reference, you don't bring in the American Psychiatric Nurses Association?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, because you always want to cite the thing that you actually read. So if you didn't actually read what the American Psychiatric Nurses Association published, then you wouldn't cite that. Because you read Smith, that's where you got your information from, you would cite Smith. So yeah, that's a great clarifying question. Because Smith was where I got my information, that's who I reference. I do not need to reference the American Psychiatric Nurses Association because I didn't actually read that source.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. And now this is how to handle acronyms. In nursing and in medicine, there are tons of acronyms, lots of different associations. And so here's how you handle that. The first time that you mention like an organization, you want to spell it out. So notice here, I said the American Psychological Association. Even though most people know what that means, like they know what APA stands for, you still want to spell it out the first time that you mention the source. And then in parentheses right after that, I have put the year of publication because we always do that. Anytime you mention the author of a source or, you know, the title of the source, you put the year that it was published. But what I'm adding here is I'm adding my acronym, APA. And what that does is that clarifies for my reader that American Psychological Association, from now on, I'm going to be referring to that as APA. And then later on, when I use information from the APA, I can just say APA. I don't have to spell out American Psychological Association. So again, the first time that you mention a source that is normally an acronym, spell it out. You capitalize all the major words in the name, American Psychological Association. We clarify for the reader that in the future, we're just going to abbreviate that. And then every other time that I mention the APA, I can just use the acronym. Similarly, you know, let's say that I'm not mentioning the American Psychological Association in my sentence. Here's how I would handle that. So people can overcome opioid abuse through residential treatment. This is from the American Psychological Association. In brackets, these kind of square things here, I've clarified that I mean the APA. In the future, I'm going to refer to them as APA. And as always, I include my publication date. So the only real difference here is I didn't say American Psychological Association in my sentence, but I still needed to clarify for my readers that that's what that acronym means. So the first time that I use American Psychological Association, I spell out the organization completely. Every other time after that, I can just abbreviate to APA. So here, you know, this is later on in my paper, people can utilize many community-based resources. That's from APA 2017. And then an important note, you're never going to use acronyms in references. Unless the acronym is in a title, you know, so like, let's say I'm using a website titled New Breakthrough from the APA. Because that's the title of the source, I would write that, you know, exactly as they have it. But in general, you don't use acronyms in references. You would always spell out the whole organization's title. We're now going to move into the section of this presentation where we're going to talk about how to correctly quote and paraphrase. So for my examples here, these are coming from the American Cancer Society. And, you know, this is actually a great example of what I was just talking about. So very often the American Cancer Society is abbreviated ACS, but in my reference here, I'm not allowed to abbreviate. So I didn't use an acronym. I spelled out American Cancer Society. But anyways, we have a narrative citation and a parenthetical citation here. So according to the American Cancer Society, this is published in 2019, quote, breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death in women, end quote. I got this from paragraph 4. Nothing really new here. This just shows you, you know, I'm quoting from a source. This is what we call a signal phrase, or some writing instructors call it a lead-in. That just tells us where the information is coming from. So according to the American Cancer Society, and then after our signal phrase, we have a comma, and then we have the quote itself. Down here, we have an example of a quote where we don't have the signal phrase. We don't have that lead in. So, quote, breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death in American women, end quote. We have our parenthetical citation. This came from the American Cancer Society, comma. It was published in 2019, comma. I found that in paragraph 4. I close my parentheses and I provide a period at the end of the sentence. And this is for quotes less than 40 words. Now, on the next slide, we're going to look at how you quote something longer than 40 words. So if you have something that's longer than 40 words, we need to format that quote as a block quote. And here are the steps that you do that, or the kind of the requirements. So it needs to be a freestanding block of text. And let's jump down here to my example. So we have our signal phrase, we have our lead in, according to the American Cancer Society 2019, comma. And then notice that this, like I've started a new line in the text. This is kind of floating on its own, and it's in a block because every line is indented like this. That's why it's called a block quote. And we're not going to put quotation marks around that. So if I go back to my previous slide, typically around shorter quotes that are less than 40 words, we're going to put those in quotation marks. But with block quotes, we don't do that. Here, you'll notice no quotation marks around my block quote. As I've mentioned, you're going to start a new line and you're going to indent the block 1/2 inch. Now, no one's really expecting you to pull out a ruler and measure. If you just like hit the tab key on your keyboard, that will indent it 1/2 inch for you. So you don't really need to worry about measuring, just hit the tab key. So it's essentially the same thing as starting a new paragraph. Hopefully you know that when you start a new paragraph, you want to indent it or you want to tab over that first line. So we're going to do that with block quotes, except every line is going to be indented like this. The entire quote should be double spaced. And then at the end of our block quote, we are going to provide our parenthetical citation. And that's actually going to come after our end punctuation. So typically, like I said, the citation is considered part of the sentence. So my parenthetical citation here, American Cancer Society, that is a part of the sentence. I put my period at the end. That is not the case with block quotes. So here you'll notice I put my period, I've ended my quote, then I provide my parenthetical citation. I got this in paragraph 1. Now also, it's kind of just like a review, because I mentioned the American Cancer Society in my sentence and I've already provided the publication date, I don't need to include that information here after my quote. I've already included it up here. What this also tells me is that this source did not have a specific author. The author of this source was the American Cancer Society. So that's how you do a block quote. What I will say, though, is typically, at least in my experience, block quotes are kind of frowned upon because in academic writing, you want to focus on your own words, your own ideas. In a minute here, we're going to talk about the importance of paraphrasing. So when you have a block quote, that's you just taking a big chunk of text from something that you read and then putting it into your paper. So you are allowed to do that. That's why we have these rules for doing that. But in general, you typically want to use shorter quotations, or you want to paraphrase things. You want to put it into your own words. It can make your writing look not as like professional, or can maybe make it look a little bit lazy if you include too many block quotes. Like if your paper has one block quote, that's fine. But if your paper is just like block quote after block quote, that's going to make it seem like you didn't really do the assignment, or, you were borrowing too heavily from one of your sources. This slide talks about how to effectively incorporate quotations. There are a few rules for that. Quotes cannot be topic sentences. So very often the first sentence of a body paragraph is going to be what we call a topic sentence. That identifies for the reader what the topic of that paragraph is, what that paragraph is going to be about. That should not include a quote. So to phrase it another way, the first sentence of any paragraph should not be a quote. There are exceptions like here or there, but in general, you do not want to quote in the first sentence of a paragraph. The same is true for the last sentence of a paragraph. So very often body paragraphs are going to end with what we call a concluding sentence. A concluding sentence is sometimes going to like summarize what the paragraph is going to be about, or it's going to find a way to kind of wrap up the paragraph. It's going to give the paragraph a sense of closure. It's going to make it feel like the paragraph is over and we're now transitioning into something else. So you also don't want to include quotes there. Quotes typically go in the middle of a paragraph. You do not want your first or last sentence of a paragraph to be a quote. And then this is how you kind of set up your quote, or how you incorporate, or sometimes you'll hear instructors call this integrating a quote. You want to begin by providing context for your reader. So, where did that info come from? And to back up a little bit, here I said, according to the American Cancer Society, I didn't just throw in my quote. I let my readers know where that information was coming from. So I've provided a little bit of context. And if you think about it, this makes sense. You have read the whole article, like what that article was saying, or you've potentially read multiple sources all about the same topic. Your reader maybe hasn't done that. They probably haven't read the articles that you have. So you kind of have to get the reader ready for your quotes. You have to provide them the necessary information for them to understand what you are about to say. Once you've provided that context, then you're actually going to quote the passage. When you're quoting from something, typically you're going to put that in quotation marks. The exception is if it is a block paragraph, and you're going to include your in-text citation. And then after your quote, you're going to discuss what that quote means, or sometimes you're going to put that quote into different words. You're going to kind of rephrase it, or you might analyze what that quote is saying and connect that information back to the point that you're trying to make. Because again, your reader isn't inside your head. It's often difficult for the reader to figure out exactly what you're trying to say or what you're trying to do. They don't know the point that you're trying to make. So we can't just throw quotes into our writing and hope that our readers are going to understand what that quote is saying and why we're presenting that information. So we have to discuss the quote or analyze the quote so that our reader knows why that information is significant or how it connects back to the overall point that we're making. And I have an example of what that looks like. So you'll notice that I have a quote in the middle of my paragraph here, but on either side of that, so before and after the quote, I've provided some context, I've provided some discussion, and this is going to help my reader understand what the quote is saying and understand the larger point that I'm trying to make. So we begin with some context. As such, there must be a strong drive to improve educational opportunities for rural children. Research has shown that, so this tells my reader kind of what this quote is going to be about. Before I even read the quotation, I know that I'm about to see something about educational opportunities for rural children. So that sets up the quote, that prepares my reader for the quote by providing some context. We then have the quote itself. Quality early childhood education makes kids more successful. Also, children who have access to high quality education programs often go on to earn higher incomes, are 20% more likely to graduate from high school, and 50% less likely to be arrested for violent crime. So that's actually the quote itself. It's from Save the Children, which was published in 2018. But I'm not just going to put the quote there and then move on. I'm also going to kind of explain why that quote is significant. So federal programs such as Head Start and Child Development Block Grants must be extended, and public leaders must work together to make President Johnson's dream a reality. So I've provided my readers with some context, what this quote was going to talk about. I presented the quote itself, including my in-text citation, and then I kind of discussed the quote. I talk a little bit about why this quote is significant, why I'm including it in my paper. So that is how you properly integrate or properly incorporate a quote in a paper. And then I'm also going to add, sometimes you can alter quotes. One way to do that is by putting an ellipsis in. An ellipsis is these three dots here, dot, dot, dot. What that shows my reader is that words have been taken out of this quote. So program outcomes have been positive, ellipsis, and evidence shows. So that just tells my reader something was removed here. Now, when we remove things from quotes, we don't want to do that just willy-nilly. And we definitely don't want to do that to manipulate what a quote is saying. You know, we don't want to be dishonest. We don't want to mislead people. You remove stuff from a quote if that's going to make the information clearer. Like, let's say it's a really long quote that has information that is just not needed, or maybe the quote is kind of confusing or it's worded in a weird way. You can use an ellipsis. You can use these three dots to take out words to make that quote easier to read, easier to understand. But we don't want to change the actual meaning of the quote. We just remove words from quotes to make it easier on our reader. You can also use brackets. And again, brackets are these kind of square things here to correct or add clarification. So in my example here, education is in brackets. That tells me that this word has been added. That word was not an original part of the quote. And we do that to help clarify things. So similar to how we use an ellipsis, we don't want to just change the word in a quote willy-nilly. We don't want to mislead anyone. But, sometimes quotes are difficult to understand, or the wording of the quote is maybe not as precise or not as clear as it could be. So we can tweak the words of a quote to help it make a little bit more sense. So here, children who have access to high quality education programs, this tells me that there was a word here originally, but that word maybe didn't make sense. Or maybe it just said access to high quality programs. And the writer here has added in the word education to clarify the type of program that they're talking about. So those are the two ways that we can alter a quote. We can remove words by using an ellipsis, or we can add or clarify things by using brackets. And again, at the top here, we had an example of how to properly integrate a quote. We provide some context, we present the quote itself, and then we discuss the significance of the quote. Next, we're moving into paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is really important for academic writing. What a paraphrase means, that's just the word that we use to say that you are putting something into your own words. So it's your own version of the information. And this is a perfectly legitimate way to borrow information from a source. And in fact, it's actually encouraged that you paraphrase more than you quote. So here, published authors paraphrase their sources most of the time rather than directly quoting the sources. Student authors should emulate or follow this practice by paraphrasing more than directly quoting. What I like to tell students and how I kind of think of this is, if I'm reading your paper, that means that I want to understand your thoughts. I want to know what you have to say about this topic. If I wanted to know what, Smith or, Johnson has to say about the topic, I would just go read them. But instead, I'm reading what you have to say. So your paper shouldn't be bogged down in a bunch of quotes and a bunch of other people's words. Instead, you want to largely put things into your own words. You want to paraphrase. And we're going to talk about how to do that effectively. So first of all, you want to reread the original passage until you really understand what it's saying. It's hard to paraphrase something if you're not quite sure what the text is saying. Once you feel like you understand it, you're going to put the text aside and then write it out on your own. We encourage writers to do this because if you're looking directly at the source as you're paraphrasing it, it can be a little bit too easy, a little bit too tempting to just take words from the source or to follow their sentence structure. If you put the original text aside, it's hopefully going to be a little bit easier for you to put that into your own words. Once you have rewritten the information, once you have put it into your own words, you're going to compare what you wrote to the original to make sure that your version accurately expresses the information. Because again, we don't want to mislead anyone. We don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. So our paraphrases still need to be accurate. They need to be true to what the original source was saying, but we're going to do our best to put that into our own words, using our own vocab, our own style. If you do use any unique terms or phrases from the original source, those should be put in quotation marks to show that you are using those words exactly. And then we still need to cite that source. So even though I put the information in my own words, I still have to give credit to the original author, because it wasn't my idea. I didn't come up with this myself. I'm borrowing it from someone. So we still need to reference that source in our list of references, and we still need to provide an in-text citation. So we have some examples here, and this gets into how to avoid plagiarism. So here we have a patchwork paraphrase. Notice that I did include an in-text citation. So this is from Chase. It was published in 1995. So that's good. I am giving the writer credit, but all of the underlined portions here are words and phrases that I took directly from Chase. And that's why it's called patchwork, is you'll see it kind of, there are patches of my own words, but then there are also patches that I took directly from the author. This is considered a bad paraphrase. I was borrowing too heavily from the author. I didn't try hard enough to put this into my own words. And in fact, this actually constitutes as plagiarism because I took a bunch of words directly from the author, but I didn't quote them. Even though I provided an in-text citation, this is still technically plagiarism. So what I would need to do is I would need to make sure that these underlined portions are completely rewritten. I need to try as best as I can to really put things into my own words and to not really borrow the author's original language. Now that can be tricky, but that is the goal of a good paraphrase, is to completely rewrite the original words while keeping the meaning the same. A good rule that I like to follow is if you use like 3 or 4 words in a row directly from a source, that should probably be quoted. So notice here we have 4 words in a row, function in a hierarchy. That's something that should probably be in quotes. And now this, we only have 2 words here, but that's kind of a unique way of saying that, designated experts. And because that's kind of unique, that's the author's own language there, that's also something that should probably be in quotes. Here, hierarchy of seniority. We have 3 words in a row that we took directly from the source. So that should probably be in quotes. That's just a general rule that I follow. That's a rule that I like to, advise my students on. Just to, because sometimes it's hard to know, like, when should I quote something? When should I, when do I not need to quote something? If you take 3 or more words in a row directly from a source, that's a pretty good indicator that those words should be quoted, or you're not doing a good enough job paraphrasing. Over here, we have a word-for-word plagiarism. Now, you'll see that a lot of this paragraph is underlined. So a lot of this I took directly from a source. Now, I did include some of my own words. Not everything here is underlined, but a lot of it is. And so we consider this word for word plagiarism. The information here was largely taken exactly from a source. There was very little effort to paraphrase this information. And on top of that, there's no in-text citation. I haven't mentioned Chase here at all. So what I'm doing here, whether I mean to or not, like maybe I did this on accident, but what this communicates to the reader is that these are my ideas. I came up with this myself. These are all my original thoughts, which is not true. I got these from Chase. So this is not only a very bad paraphrase. This is largely taken word for word from another source, and I did not put it in quotes. I also gave no credit to the original author whatsoever. So this is a very bad instance of plagiarism. I'm going to pause there for a minute. I've been talking for a while now. Any questions for me before we move on about like how to do a good paraphrase, or what counts as plagiarism or not, or how to properly quote things?
No.
Okay, great, good. So quoting and paraphrasing, which do I use? As I have already mentioned, quoting should be limited. You don't want to quote too much. Paraphrasing should be the main way that you include information from your sources. And we have a few guidelines for when it is a good idea to quote things. So you might quote to show that an expert supports your point. So you might use the exact words from an expert to show that someone agrees with you. You might also quote something if you are going to directly argue against that thing or to critique it. So if you disagree with what a source says, or you think a source is wrong, it's a good idea to quote that source so that your reader can see exactly what that source had to say. I like to think of this in terms of like real life interactions. If someone was going to argue with me, or if they were going to critique something that I said, I would probably want them to use my exact words. I wouldn't want them to put words in my mouth. I wouldn't want them to, alter what I was actually saying. So the same is true in writing. If you're going to directly like argue against someone, you're going to critique what they've said, it's a good idea to quote that. Likewise, if you're looking at the exact language that someone is using, if you are looking at someone's word choice, or you're paying a lot of attention to the tone that an author is using in their text, that's also a good time to quote. On the flip side, if the author's specific word choice doesn't really matter, you're not incorporating the information to disagree with the author, like you agree with what they say, or you're just providing general like information from an author, you probably don't need to quote from them. If you're kind of just summarizing what a source is saying, no need to quote from it really. If the exact language, the exact tone that the author is using isn't important, you probably don't need to quote. And then finally, if you're incorporating information that would lose its meaning if it was paraphrased. So for instance, if you are presenting information that is really technical, or it's very complex, or it uses a lot of very specific words that have precise meanings, that's a good time to quote. But again, if the exact language of the information doesn't really matter, and you're more going for the gist, it's better to paraphrase. But again, to reiterate, it doesn't matter if you're quoting or paraphrasing, you absolutely must still cite things. You're going to provide an in-text citation, and you're going to provide a reference at the end of your text. Now we're talking about, when do you actually cite something? What I recommend is it's better to be safe than to be sorry. So if you're not sure if you need to cite something, I would just be safe and cite it, because it's better to have an unnecessary citation than to accidentally plagiarize something. There aren't really any consequences if you cite something unnecessarily. There can be pretty bad consequences if you plagiarize. So if you're not sure, if you feel like it could go either way, just be safe and cite it. I also think it's a good idea to cite as you write. So what this means is don't wait until you're done writing a paper to put in your citations. Now, I used to do this, like when I was an undergrad, I often I would wait until the paper was done before I made my works cited page, or I would put in information from a source and I would just kind of leave a little note for myself saying make sure to cite this later. That's not really a very good practice, because sometimes you can't remember where you got the information from. Sometimes you forget to go back and cite the information, and then you've accidentally plagiarized something. So it's really a good idea. And honestly, it's not that hard once you get used to it. It's a good idea as you are writing something, you're writing a paper, you're writing a discussion forum post, whatever. As soon as you use information from a source, go ahead and put in that in-text citation. That way, for sure that you have done your due diligence and you're not accidentally plagiarizing something. And then at the bottom of this slide here, we talk about common knowledge. So if something isn't common knowledge, even if it's just something that like let's say you didn't get that information from anywhere in particular, it's just something that it's something from your own experience, you still might need to cite it, especially if you are not an expert. If you're talking about something that you don't have a degree in, or you don't have a lot of firsthand experience with, or you're not a known expert in that field, you probably still want to find a source that backs up that information. So what is common knowledge? Common knowledge is something that your average adult would know. So if I just walked up to random people on the street in the US and I asked them, who is the president right now? Most people would be able to tell me that Joe Biden is the president. So that's what we call common knowledge. I don't need a source to back that up. But if you're presenting information that an average adult probably wouldn't know, if you were to just walk up to a random group of strangers and they would have no idea what you're talking about, that's probably something that you should back up with a source. You should find an article or a website that supports that information, even if that's just something that you know. When writing a paper, generally you don't want more than 20% of your work to be quoted. So at Hondros, at least for our English classes, all of the papers are submitted through Turnitin. Turnitin matches students' writing to sources found online, as well as to things written by other students at not only Hondros, but universities all around the country, potentially even the world. And so that will show us, I always look at my students' Turnitin reports, and I can see how much of a student's paper has been quoted. And that's not always an exact measurement. I don't think Turnitin tells us the exact percentage of what is quoted versus what is paraphrased. But what Turnitin does is it does show me what percentage of your text matches other texts. So when you write a paper for this class, you're going to want to look at your Turnitin report and make sure that your match rate, this is something that you can see too. This isn't secret hidden information. You also have access to your Turnitin report. You want to make sure that less than 20% or 20% or less of your paper matches other texts. We don't want to quote too heavily from our sources. We want to mostly put things in our own words. So if you pull up your Turnitin report and it shows that 25% of your essay matches other sources, that's a good indicator that you might need to go in and paraphrase some of the things that you were quoting. So that's the 20% rule. We don't want more than 20% of a text to be quoted. Here's just a little tip that Wikipedia is generally not considered to be a reliable source. That doesn't mean that the information there isn't useful, but it's not very hard for just anybody to go on Wikipedia and to edit the articles there. So Wikipedia itself is not super reliable, but oftentimes the sources that Wikipedia cites are useful. So Wikipedia is not a bad place to go to like get your research started. You can scroll down to the bottom of an article and you can see the sources that they use, and those sources might be helpful to you. We're getting into the we are towards the end of our of the presentation here. I know this is a lot of information. Hopefully most of it has been reviewed. Towards the end of this presentation here, we're talking about what kind of sources are going to be more credible than others, or which ones are more trustworthy. So here on the left side of my screen, we have a spectrum from, these are sources that we should be pretty skeptical about. These are not very trustworthy sources. On this end of the spectrum, we have generally pretty trustworthy sources, things that we don't really need to be very skeptical about. So down here, blogs, people's personal websites, or websites that you can't really tell where the info is coming from, who published it, those, we shouldn't really trust those. Moving up, if the publication is from an advocacy group, so like from a religious organization, or oftentimes activist groups or political parties, that doesn't mean that the information is wrong. It doesn't mean that that source is like lying to you, although sometimes they are. We just want to be skeptical of sources that are coming from people with a very specific agenda. You know, like if I pull up a political party's website, their goal is to get you to vote for them. They want you to believe certain things. They want you to vote in a certain way. So we maybe shouldn't trust that information. Moving up the spectrum, news sources, like CNN, NBC, those are a little bit more trustworthy. Books that are meant for a general audience, we're getting progressively more trustworthy. We're moving up to high quality mainstream media. I think I misspoke here. Like I use CNN and NBC as examples. Those are maybe more examples of like high quality mainstream media. I think it kind of depends. Like NBC, I think maybe has like local news, like by daily news, things like stuff you'd hear on the radio, or you watch your local news program. That's different from kind of like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or CNN. So those are things that we'd consider high quality mainstream media. Moving up, we're getting into the realm of really very trustworthy books by experts. And then government websites are typically pretty trustworthy. Sometimes it depends on the government. Sometimes it depends on what the purpose of the website is. But in general, if it's a .gov source, we tend to view those as fairly trustworthy sources. And then all the way, our most trustworthy sources are peer-reviewed scholarly journals. So things that are written by scholars, published by academic journals, intended to be read by other scholars, other professionals, and that are peer-reviewed. Those are very, very trustworthy. And books written by experts, published by academic publishers. So like here, books by experts, like if you go into Barnes and Noble, you're going to come across a lot of books that are written by experts.
Professor Jacob.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I got you right. Did you say we can use newspapers to support our writings?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, a newspaper, like let's say the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, or I don't know, I don't read many newspapers, so I'm struggling to list more newspapers. But yeah, generally, a lot of newspapers, they're kind of middle of the road trustworthy. So yeah, you can definitely use those as sources. Now it does depend on the assignment. Sometimes an instructor will tell you, I only want you to use scholarly journals, or, I don't want you to use news sources. So always default to, what your instructor tells you. But generally, yes, like news sources are kind of middle of the road trustworthy. I think I was in the middle of saying, so like a lot of books that you find in like just a bookstore, those might be written by an expert, but they're probably not published by an academic publisher. Academic publishers don't tend to sell very many books in mainstream bookstores. Books by experts can be a little bit hard to find. Sometimes you have to go to specialty bookstores, or you have to order them online. But if it's published by an academic publisher, those are very, very trustworthy. Those are the high end of our spectrum. Over here on the right side of the screen, and if you've taken English 200 here at Hondros, we talk about the CRAP test. CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So currency just refers to, how recently was the source published, or is the source out of date? How relevant is the source to your topic? Is it only sort of related to what you're talking about, or does it line up exactly with what you are trying to say? The authority of the author, is the author some nobody, just someone who has a blog that they run, or is the author like a well-known expert? How accurate is the source? Does it seem like the information is not correct? Are they not citing their sources? Or on the other hand, does the source seem very logical and it's backed up by citations from other sources? You also want to consider the purpose of a source. Some things are just meant to sell you stuff, not all sources are meant to be informative. Or sometimes a source is designed to try to manipulate you, or to push a very specific agenda. Sometimes a source is just meant to be funny or to be entertaining. So you also want to consider the purpose of a source. So the best sources to use in academic writing are ones that are meant to provide information, and it presents multiple viewpoints of an argument or issue, and makes a strong case for one side, supported by many citations from other sources. So I'm not going to read through this whole chart to you, but I've provided a nice overview of the CRAP test. So when deciding if a source is worth using or not, deciding if a source is trustworthy, consider its currency, its relevance, its authority, its accuracy, and its purpose. All reference types follow the same pattern for in-text citations. I don't know. This isn't really new information, so I will just use this as, Rita, I think this might answer your question. I am, and this is a good reminder for me, I'm still going to pull up this information, but this right here, notice that they did provide the month and the date. This is clarifying for me. I think you typically do that when it is a news source. So this is published from the New York Times. That's a news source. So we would want to put the month and the date that source was published. But again, when I'm done going through these slides here, I am going to clarify that for you. Oops. Here we have another example of a narrative citation according to Jones, 2019. Here's an example of a parenthetical citation. In recent years, medical innovations have flooded the market. Jones, 2019. This is a good example. This is worth talking about. So notice in my reference here, there's no author, but we do have a title. So the title of this source is Diabetes Risk Factors. Because there's no author, we use the title of that source in our in-text citation. So in the article titled Diabetes Risk Factors, 2021, so that's how we handle a source that doesn't have an author. Same thing here. There are 5 top contributing factors when it comes to diabetes. This source did not have an author, so I put the title of the source because that's the first thing that shows up in my reference, diabetes risk factors. We put that here. It's a title of an article, so we put it in quotation marks, and we put the publication date. So just kind of a little review there to end our session. And here are the, this is actually, these are examples of references. This is, this presentation is going on pretty long. So I don't know if it would be the best use of our time for me to read through every single thing here. What I'm going to do is highlight this for you. And if you want to, you can take a picture or you can do a screenshot. We also have this information in our library, and there are lots of websites online that can show you how to do this. But this is how you cite a journal article if there are 3 or more authors. So like this source has 3 authors, Edmondson, Bollock, and Lee. So that's how we would do this citation. Notice, however, in my in-text citation, I don't list all 3 authors. I just provide the first author's name. Edmondson et al. Et al. Stands for and others. So this is written by Edmondson and others. Same thing here in my parenthetical citation. I don't list all the authors. I just put the first author. Edmondson came first. Edmondson et al. 2017. I found this on page 44. If there are 1 to 2 authors, like this source, for instance, has 2 authors. This was written by Davis and Jones. We do last name, comma, first initial, and last name, comma, first initial. This was published in 2019 in June. And then notice in contrast that in our in-text citation, I do mention both authors. So if it's 3 or more, you can just say the first author et al. If there are 1 to 2 authors, you want to list all of them. So Davis and Jones 2019 or Davis and Jones 2019. And it's worth pointing out that in the sentence, I write out the word and. In my parenthetical citation, I use an ampersand, or I use the and symbol. Oh, okay. And so these are from periodicals, like a journal is published periodically. And that's why the month is specified here. Same thing here. Journals are published periodically, like they're not news, but they're published regularly. So we include the year and the month. This is a news source. It's also published periodically. So we put the year, the month, and the date. So that actually that clarifies things for me. If it is a source that is a periodical, if it's something that's published periodically, you would put the date. I think earlier in the presentation, I was making an educated guess that you provide the month if it is a website. I want to clarify now that that was incorrect. You provide the month if it's a periodical. So for instance, like a website, that is not a periodical. Websites, it's just there. They're not like publishing new websites all the time, but things like an online journal, or like a news source, they are publishing things regularly. So you would want to put the month. So here's how you cite an online newspaper or magazine. Here's how you cite a government report. Notice that there's no author, but instead we have the institution. So it has what we call an institutional author. This is published by the National Cancer Institute. This is a periodical. So we're going to put the month there. And we have our examples of our in-text citations as well. So I recommend like taking a picture of this, taking a screenshot. I'll pause for a moment for you to do that.
Got it.
All right, great. And then one more page of references here. So this is by an organization author. This is basically exactly the same as an institutional author. You know, there's no author here, no specific author, but it was published by the American Nurses Association. There's no date, so we put ND. Same thing in our in-text citation, according to the American Nurses Association. There's no date, so we just put ND. Here's an example of just one author. We've looked at this before. This has Shaw. If there's no author stated and it wasn't published by an organization or an institution. So for instance, this was published by an organization. Here, though, this wasn't published by a specific like institute or a specific government body. So we just put the title of the source. Just this article was called Workplace Incivility. We put that here as the first part of our reference. There was no date, so we put ND. Likewise, in our in-text citation, we put the title of the source. Notice that it's in quotation marks. That tells us it's a title of an article. No date, so we put ND. Here's how you cite a book. Very similar. You know, books, that's an example of something that isn't published periodically. So we do put the edition. This is the second edition, but we don't need to put the month that it was published. And it's very likely that a book would not tell you what month it was published in. That's just information we don't really need to know. So I'll pause here again if you want to take a picture or a screenshot. And here we have an example of a references page. So this, like at the bottom of an essay, this is what your references would look like. You're going to put the word references. That's going to be centered in the middle of the page. You're going to bold it. Your sources are going to be in alphabetical order based on the first letter. So A, C, D, F, G, those are in alphabetical order. We also use what is called a hanging indent. So the first line is not indented, but all the other lines in the reference are. Here, this is only one line, so there's no need to indent something. But if we move down to this next source, first line, not indented, the next line is indented. Down here, both of these references are only a single line, so we don't need to indent anything. I'll also note here that whatever comes first in your reference, so American Nurses Association, Calkins, Davids, Fredericks, Giddens, that's what should be in your in-text citation. Your in-text citation is always going to be whatever comes first in your reference. So like in this example, there's not a specific author, but this was published by the American Nurses Association. So that's what we would put in our in-text citation. Here, this does have a specific author, Calkins, so that's what would go in our in-text citation. So typically, it's going to be an author's last name, except if the source doesn't have an author, or the author is like a specific institution, an organization, a government body, something like that. And here, this is the last page of our presentation. these are just some due date reminders, as well as some information on how to receive help about this. So you have pre-writing and planning for your first paper in English 205. That pre-writing and planning is due Thursday. Oh, these, I guess Heather did not update these dates. That's unfortunate. But luckily, and hopefully you've noticed this, all of our assignments are labeled with with numbers, and that tells you the week. So the pre-writing and planning, that's due Thursday of week 3. The peer review, that's going to be in week 4. That's due on Thursday of week 4. The final copy is due week 5 on Sunday. I apologize for that. I looked through this presentation. I looked through these slides before giving the presentation. I did not notice at the time that the dates had not been updated. That is my bad. But again, these tell you the week. So pre-writing and planning, Thursday of week 3, rough draft, Thursday of week 4, final draft is Sunday of week 5. All of these dates are also in the calendar tool in my classroom. There is help available to you. So both Heather and I, well, so, you know, because I'm an instructor, you should send your paper to me. I will give you feedback on your papers up until like the Wednesday before the paper is due. That's the last day that I will accept papers. So the final copy is due Sunday of week 5. That means the Wednesday of week 5 is the last day that I can give people feedback on their papers. The reason for that is, you know, especially if I have a lot of people asking for help, it takes time. It takes time to read through people's papers and give thoughtful feedback. So there has to be a cutoff date. Both Heather and I, we use the Wednesday before a paper is due. So you're welcome to send me a copy of your draft. I'll give you some feedback on it. You can also set up a time to meet with me over Zoom. I can work with you on, you know, grammar and punctuation. We can talk about the structure of your paper. I can help you brainstorm. I can help you with APA style and conducting research. Can help you with any of that. You can always email me with questions and concerns. This is Heather's number, so I would not call that. I mean, she'd probably be willing to help you out, but because I'm your instructor, please contact me first. I don't really like to give out my phone number if I don't have to, but I do check. I'm very good at checking my emails. And if you do want to do a phone call, we can. I just don't like to give out my number willy-nilly, but email me. We can set up a time to do a phone call, or, you know, let me know and we can set up a time to do a Zoom meeting. I am here to help. Any questions for me? I know that was a lot of information, but is there anything I can clarify? Anything that I didn't talk about?
I'm good with the APA. I just want to find out about our, okay, let me put it this way. When does the 48-hour grace period start and when does it end?
For late work?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let me, I will answer that in 1 second. I want to make sure that I address any questions about like APA.
Okay.
There are only 2 people here in this meeting. And it doesn't seem like the other person is speaking up. So I'm going to assume that no one has any more questions about APA. So I'm going to stop the recording of this presentation, and then I will answer your question.